Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity Sauna. My name is Janne Kauhanen, and I will be your sauna majuri and the host of this podcast. Thank you for joining us for another session where we sweat out the hot topics in security. Welcome to all listeners, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at Cybersauna. As the year draws to a close, it's time for us to review and reflect on notable infosec events and trends from 2022, and also what might happen in 2023. In this episode, we're joined by cybersecurity advisor Paul Bruciani and WithSecure intelligence researcher Andy Patel. We're going to hear their thoughts on cybersecurity impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the future of disinformation in the wake of the Twitter takeover, and other significant developments. So I guess one of the biggest developments of 2022 has been the war on Ukraine. It was supposed to be the harbinger of a cyber apocalypse, but that never quite materialized, or did it?
It didn't materialize. I'm not sure whether it was ever expected to. I think hybrid warfare it's an invention of the Russians. It was invented because ultimately it's cheap. It was invented during a period when economic prosperity in Russia was not very good, and it has proven to be effective. It's a blunt weapon. Its effects can't always be controlled. So you remember several years ago the NotPetya events, which caused billions of pounds of damage to all sorts of organizations. I don't think the perpetrators would have imagined when they launched it. I think it will remain a weapon that will be used by both sides for as long as the conflict exists. If there is an upside from the cyber war that's being conducted between Russia and Ukraine, it is that when peace comes, it will be one way in which the Ukrainian economy can be kickstarted. They will be the world experts by then in cyber resilience, and you can foresee a day when they have a reputation as developed as that of companies within Israel who face similar threats over prolonged periods of time.
That's a very good point. What I was thinking about when you mentioned NotPetya is that the conventional military has these sort of area denial weapons like landmines, where the point is to block off like entire patches of land for the enemy. So do you think the cyber things like NotPetya are sort of the cyber equivalent of area denial weapons? You mentioned that you don't think the originators of that weapon intended it to spread that far, but did they? Because it spread through the software that was used by everybody who's basically dealing with Ukraine. Is that then the message? Don't deal with Ukraine or you get hit by stuff like that. But the cyber attacks that we've seen have been sort of contained to Ukraine.
Like I said, cyber warfare is cheap relative to war by other means. There's a trade-off between how targeted you want your attack to be and the cost of achieving an effect on that target. So if we get to go to the other end of the spectrum, if you remember the Stuxnet attack on the Iranian nuclear processing infrastructure, that was a very targeted attack, and it has been estimated that the cost of that attack to its perpetrators was around about $300 million in development costs. So there is a trade-off between how targeted you want your attack to be and how prepared you are to achieve a precise goal.
I mean, I understand that like Ukrainian companies are still being targeted by like these wipers and a lot of ransomware.
Yeah.
I see cyber attacks as a sort of a separate theater to kinetic warfare. So Russia can conduct cyber attacks against anyone, and their retaliation is pretty much always going to be cyber attacks back. But now that they've gone in and started kinetic war with Ukraine, there's no need to hack their power stations. They're just firing missiles at them instead. So they can then focus those cyber attacks on others like people, countries, or organizations that are helping Ukraine.
But that's the thing, are they? Because early in the war, when we saw Ukraine getting hit on the cyber front pretty much, the thinking was that's where the war is happening, that's where they're focusing their effort. If it is, as you say, if now that the kinetic phase is in full swing, and we know that that's better at destroying stuff than cyber stuff is, so where is that cyber effort going now? Like, we're still seeing Ukrainian companies and infrastructure getting hit by cyber somewhat, but you would think that there would be time now to do other things, but we're not seeing retaliatory attacks against Western companies and governments.
I'm not a military strategist, but I don't think it's an either-or question. I think you can apply pressure through conducting war, but also by implementing cyber attacks. And the handy thing about cyber warfare is that it doesn't fit neatly into, I guess, what's the most widely accepted definition of warfare, the von Clausewitz definition of warfare, in that it doesn't fulfill one of the three conditions. It is not violent, at least not directly violent. So for that reason, I think it's useful for governments to apply pressure, albeit in a less precise manner, to achieve their goals.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe what I'm still looking for is, to me, it seemed very clear when the war on Ukraine began that Russia's message was don't side with Ukraine or you'll get cybered. And not a lot of people did. So I guess my question is, why not?
Good question. I guess it comes down to resources.
Yeah.
And although it's not widely reported, I don't imagine for a moment that Russia hasn't been itself under considerable amount of cyber attack.
Right.
From which it has to defend itself.
Yeah.
Prestige ransomware group hit both Ukraine and Poland, suggested that the Iridium group were behind that, and it represents one of reported 94 ransomware groups operating in Ukraine at the current moment. There are a lot of different groups, a lot of different types of ransomware being fired at Ukrainian infrastructure at the moment. But this one stood out as being not just Ukraine, but also Poland. And in fact, there was another group that targeted both Ukraine and Poland. And this was a hands-on attack. So a hands-on operation. They phish someone, they get in, and then they deploy ransomware across the organization and then fire it off, run all at once at the same time.
I like your thinking, Paul, that Ukraine now developing these capabilities of sort of withstanding and recovering from these attacks. I've been thinking about that same thing in even the electricity networks that have been hit quite a lot, that this might actually be something that they're becoming world experts in, or already are, I'm sure.
Yes, I'd like to think so. There's nothing more valuable than direct experience rather than theoretical knowledge when it comes to helping organizations be resilient, and Ukraine, when things settle down, will be well placed to provide those services.
How applicable do you think those skills are going to be to sort of the problems companies are facing? Like the contingency problems that organizations have are a little bit different from a country at war.
They are, but cybersecurity, whether it's to protect yourself from aggressors conducting cyber war against you or whether it's from criminals, both those problems are intractable problems. They're hard to solve. And I think that the skills acquired by those responding to direct attacks from Russia will be just as applicable to companies protecting themselves from attacks from criminals.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the outcome of a ransomware or a wiper is going to be the same, whether it came from a criminal group or a nation state. Right?
Early on in the war, Ukraine issued this call for hackers to support their cause, to attack targets in Russia, and even provided some coordination to this. Do you think this sort of cyber militia is going to be useful or helpful or something that we're going to see in the future as well?
If it can be directed, and that is, I think, going to be where the challenge lies. Hackers hack for all sorts of different reasons, and patriotism isn't necessarily the first reason.
I think it's also, again, this factor of being at war. And once you are at war, cyber war is like lower impact to the kinetic war, right? So if you're already being bombed and tanks are rolling in, then a call to arms for a cyber militia to attack back, I think is completely acceptable to do that, right? I mean, we talk about hack back a lot when it comes to cyber warfare between countries that are essentially at peace with each other, and whether we should be doing that. But like once you are at war, I would say that the worry about hack back being legal or illegal doesn't matter anymore, right?
So one thing 2022 will be remembered as is yet another year of supply chain attacks. I don't remember how many previous years we've called this was the year of supply chain attacks, but 2022 was yet another one. Did we see anything unusual or something we didn't expect, or just more of the same?
I think what has been surprising this year are the largest attacks which have involved exploitation of vulnerabilities that are far more widespread than people had realized at the start of the year. And I think this won't be the last of them. There'll be more we'll see in the years to come.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think ultimately because they present opportunities for criminals to gain access to organizations and to gain monetarily from them.
Sure, yeah.
By whatever means, through ransomware, for example.
Why do you think the supply chains we've seen this year have been more widespread than before?
I think it's because they have been targeted more than they have in the past. Criminals have to learn that their techniques are evolving. And I think criminals have come to realize that this is an effective way to gain foothold in organizations at relatively little cost to them and to conduct their criminal campaigns cost effectively.
So the criminals are like actively looking for targets that will give them sort of the maximum impact.
That's correct. They recognize that once a vulnerability has been made public, people can't or are not willing to remove that through patching, for example. It often takes weeks and many months, and that gives them a window of opportunity for them to conduct their attacks.
Is there an element here where the part of the problem is that software tools are becoming more complex? And we've been talking about software bill of materials, things like that. A lot of people don't even know what goes into their software, like what sort of libraries and components are in there.
That's correct. And a lot of them are open source components and they're not actively maintained. Vulnerability exists. It's not certain when it will be patched, when an updated version of the software will be made available. Open source software doesn't come with a warranty. And I think although it's accessible and free to use, it presents a security problem which people have overlooked till now. I think increasingly the organizations will be looking towards understanding what software they're using and ensuring that it is maintained in a secure state.
I tend to think there's probably a great deal of vulnerabilities still out there. It's just not a lot of people looking for them. When they do find them, like you said, the patching phase has like a really long tail. So there's always going to be systems out there that aren't patched against a vulnerability.
As long as we write software to the standard that is commonplace today, for example, using unmaintained open source code libraries and so forth, then we will always have a software problem in that there'll always be vulnerabilities that will continue to be discovered and we'll continue to have to patch them, and criminals will continue to exploit them through conducting supply chain attacks and such like.
What do you guys think about sort of specialization? It seems to me like the trend, whether we're talking about software or supply chains in the real world, like food production, things like that, I feel that we're specializing more and more so that instead of there being like 12 more or less similar pieces of software out there, there's just one and everybody uses it. And there's just this one giant company that produces all of our beef. And if that company gets hit, if that software gets hit, everybody's screwed.
The digital world, in some respects, is creating fragility because of the concentration of services on a few very specific, widely used technologies.
Didn't I understand correctly that they're now rewriting a lot of Linux in Rust just because that sort of automatically removes the possibility for the sort of vulnerabilities that you would get from writing C or C++ code.
Yeah, certainly one long-term institution that's currently undergoing big upheavals is Twitter. That's been in the mainstream news quite a lot. But do we think the Twitter controversy, the Twitter takeover, if you can call it that, do we think that that's going to have impacts that are meaningful to our audience, security people?
Yes, absolutely. What immediately stands out is the change to the verified status that was done some weeks back, where you can now buy that verified status for $8 if you live in certain regions. And I think it's only on iOS App Store right now. But well, they pulled it. But anyway, you were able to buy exactly the same looking check mark as a verified account. And now people got very used to Twitter having these verified accounts, that it was a stringent process of verification. You didn't get that check mark easily.
Yeah.
In fact, a colleague of mine didn't get it until quite recently, even though he was established personality and had a lot of followers and so on.
So it used to be a verification of who you actually are, and now it's a verification of the fact that you have $8.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't verify at all who you are.
Yeah.
And of course, immediately what started happening after that, as we saw, were people created accounts, made them look like some company, bought the verification status, and then started posting and sort of trolling those companies. I mean, and that's all fun and well, but you can buy that verification status and pretend to be emergency services or pretend to be a politician or a government institution or something like that at an appropriate moment to spread disinformation, cause some kind of actual physical trouble if there's a natural disaster or something. There are many, many ways in which purchasing this $8 verification badge can be used like hugely maliciously. Scams, fraud, all these sorts of things as well. And it looks exactly the same as the proper verified one, except if you click on it and then it'll tell you whether it was a proper verified or purchased. And in fact, if you look at the Twitter API or the JSON that comes out of Twitter, it's not using that old verified flag in the JSON. It's some new thing that denotes that it was a paid verified badge. And now they're talking about adding the original verified badge back, but as a different color or something, so you can have both. And the whole thing is just a mess.
I know you're consuming tweets sort of in the raw format from the API, so for you it looks different.
It does. Actually, you can't even see it from the API.
Right, yeah.
Because it's a field that's only being read by the clients, so the web client or the iOS client. But it actually, it isn't a field that exists in the current API. So even with the current API, you can't tell whether someone paid $8 or not for their verification status, because you don't see it. You only see the old verification status.
I think what the Twitter fiasco, I think we can call it a fiasco.
Sure, absolutely.
has highlighted is that the important issue of identity and verification of identity. Elon Musk he's founded 3 very successful companies.
Right.
So although in the popular press he's written off, I don't think he should be underestimated. He's more driven. He has a vision that many others don't have, and he's willing to take risks. Those are remarkable qualities which have led to his success in the past. And I don't know what the prospects for Twitter are, but I would say that everybody does need a platform. So whether it's Twitter or something else, we will always need an outlet for our opinions and so forth. I think he will pull it around. It will be chaotic and it will take time, but I think he'll create something that's sort of more orderly and stable and attract back users.
So one thing I wanted to talk to you about on the topic of news, something I saw in the news this year was in the US, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, was starting to demand that stock-listed companies have on their boards somebody who understands something about cybersecurity. Do you think regulation like this will work and will do what it's intended to do to sort of bring the cybersecurity topics to boardroom discussions?
I think this is an example of good regulation.
Yeah.
Because I think it changes the discussion within executive committees and in board meetings, in that the CISO isn't there simply to brief the board members or the executives. They're there to have a discussion with them around and make risk-based decisions. And I think the nature of that interaction is much more likely to yield decisions that are logical and defensible in view of the threats an organization may face and the security strategy it chooses for itself.
And you'd have to hope that, just like GDPR or other regulations, so when a government imposes a regulation, that people actually start to think about everything around it, like think about why that regulation exists and what they should be doing. And so to introduce a regulation like that will do more than just hopefully filling that checkbox of having CISO there, but to actually think about why does this regulation exist and how can we do this better?
Yeah, but I think just even having that dedicated role in the room will, like you said, Paul, it will make it's not just anymore having the security experts come in and weigh in on security topics. It's having the security mindset in the room for any and all topics.
It was several decades ago when I think it was the Sarbanes-Oxley regulations were introduced in the US, which required boards to have somebody on the board with financial competence. That boards started considering in a much more serious manner the financial risks that they were taking. It may not have been Sarbanes-Oxley, but
it was
several decades ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago or something.
Okay. Yeah, so prior to that, boards weren't even required to have somebody of financial competence on their boards, even though their very survival depended on their solvency.
I understand, Paul, you've been looking at the predictions people have made before about this year and sort of whether they came true or not. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. I think in total, I counted roughly 160 predictions made by 50 or so organizations. Now, that's after weeding out predictions which aren't really predictions. For example, organizations saying the thing we saw last year will continue next year.
Right.
So super safe predictions, or ones with a dollop of self-interest in them. Like the problem that requires our product is going to become even more acute next year.
Yeah.
So weeding all those sorts of predictions out, there are about 160. And the things that sort of caught my mind in respect to what's happened this year is the surprising lack of predictions around cloud security. Given that the whole world is moving to the cloud, I was surprised that there were so few predictions made in that area. There are a lot made to do with supply chain attacks, with ransomware and geopolitical situation, but very few related to cloud security. The second thing I noted was people beginning to focus on systemic risks. Really two types of systemic risks. Those to do with market concentration. For example, the fact that we buy over 50% of cloud services from just 3 cloud service providers, and the internet infrastructure we rely on, which I read somewhere that 90% of international internet traffic travels through just 436 cables, which are easy to disrupt. We've seen evidence of that this year. So that's interesting. And I think we'll see more predictions in that area going forward. I think we'll see increasing concern about the fragility of our infrastructure upon which the whole digital age depends. And the third and last area are the threats to satellite communications, which is interesting because satellite communications provide a means to bypass the carefully negotiated treaties, telecoms-related treaties in the past. And as a consequence, they will be seen by some states as a threat to their security. So, for example, take China or even Russia, there's concerted attempts to control the information flow into and out of those countries. Well, satellite communications overrides that. So Elon Musk, coming back to Elon Musk again, and his Starlink project, one wonders whether they will be a target for attack in the future.
That was the show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please get in touch with us through Twitter with the hashtag Cybersauna with your feedback, comments, and ideas. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe.